Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the Upanishads, the revealed scriptures, are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. For there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome everyone to this first class of a new series, which will probably be a 2-class series, and it's on the Atma Upanishad. Last 2 weekends, we were looking into the Vajra Sukha, that is the Upanishad of the diamond needle, and Vajra Suchika it's called. And we found out how penetrating the Vedantic wisdom was, or is, and therefore we have this follow-up class on the main subject of Vedanta, which is the indivisible self. As we were saying earlier at satsang yesterday, we want to make sure that we recognize and realize the indivisible self and not the individual self. That can come along as we focus our minds upon higher reality. And that's what we're trying to do here in these classes, that ongoing series of classes, and a lot of them having to do with these Upanishads, many of which the great mind of Shankara did not have the time to contemplate and put out in a good commentary. And he did maybe 10 or 11 of the 108 that are available to us nowadays. But these last couple Upanishads we've been doing are affectionately called into the group of minor Upanishads, because they haven't been called forth and meditated on and commentated on in a great way. So we'll continue to do our part to look into these great scriptures, as the phrase Upanishadam Mahastram means. Mahastra, Maha means great. So they're always looking at these great scriptures in India as being the foundational scriptures pertinent to that phrase that we call Vedanta in this day and age, which is that darshana, or that method or clear way of seeing, which is most recognized today along with yoga. Of course, yoga has gone the way of a kind of physical yoga only, but it's the Raja Yoga that's really meant when we say yoga in accord with a darshana, that is one of the 6 orthodox darshanas. Vedanta and yoga are 2 that are still available to us. Vedanta mainly because of Swami Vivekananda's visit here in 1893 to the West. He came to England and America. He came to America twice, and so before he left, he was doing deep meditation on what we could most benefit from in India's vast and deep and aged and cured revealed scriptures, as we were just talking about. And he said that since they're very much intellectually oriented and have made some advancements along that particular yoga, then we should make sure that they know about the Vedanta, Anta end of the Vedas, which are these Upanishads. So today we get a chance to look into the Atma Upanishad. When I'm doing these Upanishads, these short series of classes, I'm on purpose choosing short ones, because there are some very lengthy ones that would take a whole retreat to go into, or a long series over months to try and look into some of the great teachings there. That's how deep they are and how profuse they are with wisdom. We've been looking at some of the Mother Upanishads, some of the Yoga Upanishads. Well, let's look this time pretty much at a very straightforward Vedantic or Vedic Upanishad, because it has to do with that subject of the Atman. That's our true self, and contrasted to the ego self, which is often called the Antahakarana, or the inner organ, which is fourfold. That consists of our mind, our thoughts, our intellect, and our ahamkara, this non-self, this what we were just calling or referring to as the individual self rather than the indivisible self. So looking at the contrast between the true self and the non-self is one of the great ways in which the rishis of India were able to bring forth the real and contrast it to the unreal. Maybe we shouldn't get too much bothered by the term unreal. It's been explained in Vedanta by more contemporary seers that when they say unreal, anicca just means non-eternal, or always changing. So it doesn't take a lot of deep intelligence to realize that the world around you is constantly changing all the time. That's why great seers, for instance, in other traditions like Jesus, said that it's like the shifting sands that you wouldn't want to build a house upon, because that shift could happen at any time and bring the whole thing tumbling down. So what you want is the bedrock of the true self, or the true nature of mankind. And we have a very wonderful 4-letter word for that, or 5-letter word. In this Upanishad, 4-letter word, Atma Upanishad, means the Atman. It's the indivisible, unchanging self that is rather easily surmised or recognized if one has the wherewithal to set about doing that. That is, the sincerity and the sincere seeking that one needs to find something very subtle. And in fact, it's in this very Upanishad where you hear some of those adages about the subtlemost of the subtle. Anuranian is a Sanskrit word, or one Sanskrit word, or sukshma. Sukshma-jnana, how to meditate on the most subtle of the subtle. So in this Upanishad you'll find, as I read some of the slokas to you, they're mentioning that the seers found it by concentrating on it as if it were a millet of grain, for instance, or in other Upanishads as if it were gold hidden in rivers, in mountain streams. One of my favorites is oil and sesame seed, because for some reason rivers are vaster and there's more chance somebody will stumble upon a nugget of gold, and people will come running, like in the West in California for the gold rush. But it's less likely that people are going to look at a sesame seed and say, there's something valuable there, and then go through all the trouble to build a press and press a bunch of them, after you grow them, that is, and then come up with just a drop of oil and say, that's tasty, I wonder what its nutrients are. And pretty soon you've got bottles of it on the health food store shelf, and people are buying it hand over fist. So anyway, this is one of those metaphors that we use for the subtleness of Brahman and how difficult Brahman is to detect. One of the misleading things is the beauty of nature. So in the ancient Sankhya system that continued on through Vedanta and Yoga darshanas, they were always looking for this distinction between Purusha, which was their name for the true self then, and it's still continued on today. The indweller in the 9-gated city is a Purusha, because you've got 9 apertures in the body, so it begins to point toward this fact that it's dwelling there in the physical form. And this Upanishad will give some credence to that. It's very unique, but I'm getting to that. We're playing it off against Prakriti, or nature, which is the changing reality. When they looked into the unchanging, they found out that this Atman was stable and solid and unchanging, immutable. It was always there, even from lifetime to lifetime. When they meditated on it from lifetime to lifetime, they couldn't find any break in it or any absence to it. Even in deep sleep, if you meditated long enough, you would have to find a witness there in deep sleep that would remember deep sleep when you came back from it. Otherwise, nobody would remember that state of formlessness, which we call deep sleep. And so formlessness itself might not get recognized as a status, the highest status of Brahman. Don't get confused between the two words, Atman and Brahman. Shankara said Brahman is that vast ocean of consciousness. Atman is that swell of bliss that comes up every once in a while, that when it comes up, it doesn't break, it just disappears back in and rises. And its rising fills Brahman with joy, and it's that joy that fills the 7 worlds, and the lokas, and the bardos, and the conscious awareness of people. And it even is there, they say, all the way down to air, earth, fire, water, and ether, which is why they call that the Pancha Mahabhutas. I was looking at a hotel in India the other day and found out that they come and enjoy the Pancha Mahabhutas, they were saying on their advertisement. And it's right there flowing along a river in the Ganges, and we'll do a puja to that river for you, and you'll be able to enjoy the Pancha Mahabhutas. So, boy, that's an ancient phrase all the way back to Lord Kapil's time, the 5 great divine elements. So the Atman exists in all of that, and it's just a matter of detecting the changing essence in all of it, and not getting misled by change. So that change we call Maya, and when people fall into belief in the changing world as being real again as the opposite of unreal, or changing all the time, then they fall onto a cycle of time, the Buddha said, called the Kala Chakra, and that includes birth and death, because of pain and pleasure. And so the suffering would be the first rule to that. You have to realize that if you get on that cycle, that you will suffer in the body. So there's a drawback to the changing Atman, if you want to put it that way, which is what the Atma Upanishad is about to tell us, and I'm getting there, don't worry. But this preamble that I'm used to giving to try and set our minds in that high atmosphere of Upanishadic wisdom then has to do with this Atma Brahma, or this very self which is one with Brahman. It's like Jesus saying, I and my Father are one, or the Rishis saying, Tat Tvamasi, that Brahman you are, or Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. Those are great statements, Mahavakyas, that have been said in different religious traditions, but have been concentrated on after the realization of the non-dual essence called Brahman in India for ages, really. Can't even assign it a time. That's one of the mistakes of the historians, or the drawbacks to the historian, to the subject of history, is that as one of our charts will show us today when we're looking at it, is that there's no beginning, middle, and end to any of this. It's just a rising and falling of one essence. And that essence is going to show itself to you in different forms, with different names, in different times, locations, time and space, in other words. And we want to make sure to know that that's that prestidigitation of the hand of Maya, 5-fold, right? She's got 5 fingers. She's always throwing up the sets of 5s, 5 elements, and 5 yamas, 5 niyamas, and other sets of 5s, 5 senses to enjoy them and to suffer them. So in that regard then, we always have this teaching from ancient India about this division between what was later called the wheat and the chaff, or in this case, the Purusha and the Prakriti. Purusha being this indivisible soul, and Prakriti being nature, which is always changing. Again, remember, nature has that potential drawback of being all attracting, of being hypnotizing, of being able to cause people to think that it is reality, when it's always what's lying behind it, the Purusha, that's the reality. So keeping that in mind, then we can dive into the Atma Upanishad, because it has a very distinct way of I don't think parting company or arguing with any of the other discriminators. There's those who are following the path of neti, which is this is real, that's not, and you have to separate the wheat from the chaff and do away with the chaff. That has to do with the individual's own self-realization, so that they can see the truth and the truth can set them free. However, in this Upanishad, it takes a more vast and universal stance, a broad stance, which is very helpful in the end, without compromising the fact that the Atman is one and indivisible. So this is the Atma Upanishad. So before we start into it, we always have to chant one of the 7 peace chants that they place at the beginning and end of every Upanishad. So this one starts out with Om Bhadram. Let's go ahead, those of you who know it, chant it with me. Om Bhadram Karnabhihi Srinayama Devaha Bhadram Pashyema Akshabirya Jatra Stirairangaistushtuvam Sastanuvir Vyashema Devahitam Yadayahu Swasti na Indra Vrida Shavaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwadevaha Swasti nastarksho arishtanemihi Swasti no brihaspatir dadatu Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi, which rendered into English as maybe I can read this. We have our own English translation of that. May we hear with our ears what is good and spiritual, see with our eyes what is noble and uplifting, and may we, while worshiping the Lord and Mother with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to others, who showed they had a great compassion for all beings and a desire that they all realize the truth and be set free. But this particular commentator has a little bit different English. He says, "Oh, you devas," that is, all you gods, may we hear with our ears what is auspicious, may we see with our eyes what is auspicious, and ye worthy of worship, may we enjoy the term of life allotted to us by the gods, praising them with our bodies and limbs steadily. May the glorious Indra, that's the god of the gods, bless us. May the all-knowing sun bless us, that's Surya. May Garuda, the thunderbolt against evil, bless us. May Brihaspati, that's the great teacher of all, grant us well-being. Om, let there be peace with me, let there be peace in my environment, let there be peace in the forces that act upon me. Om, peace, peace, peace. So with those 2 English translations, you should be able to get a full amount of meaning from these Shanti, Shanti, Shanti chants and slokas that they always put at the beginning, as if to set your mind in a good position to be able to hear what's being said. So our speaker, our sayer, our soothsayer, in this particular Upanishad is Angiras. We've met him before, and he's got teachers like Dattatreya and others in other Upanishads, and he's beginning to talk about this unique way of presenting the Atman. It's one, no doubt, and he'll say that, but it takes 3 forms. So you can see with this new chart that I put together, the 3 states of the Atman. So that says something, let's put it this way, because we don't want to step on any non-dual truth here and insult anyone, but basically Sri Ramakrishna used to say that a man who is an actor, as a professor, profession, would go to the play that night, he'd dress up as a cop, or he'd dress up as a robber, he'd dress up as a thief or a policeman, and then he would go on stage and play his part. And he would take off that costume, put on his regular clothes, and go home. So and then he'd be who he was for his wife, and he'd be who he was for his children. So apparently he's got all these states. He's got all these different ways in which he can express himself, you see. And nonetheless, what's the meaning? Is that he's always the same man. So that's how we have to look at this teaching of the three Atmans, so that we don't, it doesn't jar us into, well, I thought you said the Atman was one and indivisible, and we get all argumentative, and that defeats the purpose for looking at this unique view of the Atma Upanishad. So I'll just read it. It's in 2 sections, so I'm going to read the first section for you. It's only 4 slokas. Then section 2 has about 31 slokas. So we'll at least get through today with taking the first section of this Upanishad. He says, that is, Angira said, the spirit manifests itself in 3 ways: the self, the inner self, and the supreme self. There are, for instance, the organs, the skin, inner and outer, flesh, hair and thumb, fingers, backbone, the nails, the ankles, the stomach, the navel, the sexual organ, the hip, the thighs, the cheeks, the ears, the brows, the forehead, the hands, the flanks, the head and the eyes. These are born and these die, so they constitute the outer self. So in that that's actually 3 slokas of section 1. 2 slokas. He describes the outer Atman. See on the chart there, it says Bahya Atman. So Bahir Antaran Va. Basically the outer and the inner we're talking about. And that outer and inner is very helpful for people to understand that there's a changing external, and there's then something that transcends it, out of which the changing external comes from, which is the internal. The problem with that is some people start to think that maybe the inner is the changeless, but it isn't, because the inner self, which is called Antaratman there, see the Bahya Atma and the Antaratman, the inside we'll also find is full of changes, probably more changes than you can shake a stick at, or more changes than the outer Atman ever had a chance to express. So let's read what the inner self is about, because this is simple and easier, but it's a very good distinguishing they're making here, good discrimination. And Angaras proceeds and he goes on and says, next is this inner self, indicated by different elements like earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Then desire, aversion, pleasure, pain, delusion, doubts, etc., and memory, and voice marked by high pitch, accentlessness, short, long, and prolate vowel sounds, the hearer, smeller, taster, leader, agent, and self of knowledge, walking, shouting, enjoying, dancing, singing, and playing on musical instruments. He is that ancient spirit that distinguishes between Nyaya, Mimamsa, and the institutes of various dharmic law, and the specific object of listening, smelling, and grasping. He is the inner self. So you can see with this beautiful description that it could be very possible for people who are seeking the inner self to fall into the premature assumption that, oh, that's the Atman, you see. Because it's so glorious, it's so vast, it has so many properties, it has so many qualities. Obviously, it's got the inner causes to the 5 elements. So it's indicated by these outer 5 elements, Angaras says. That is, if you see air, earth, fire, water, and ether, you should immediately be put on your alert that there's a great creator behind everything. Isn't it true? says the beauty of nature is there. So instead of becoming hypnotized by it and settling for that as the final conclusion, you should say, what made that? What created that? What incepted that? Where's the origin to that? And in that way is the discriminating mind, which is this inner self, as it says here, beginning to distinguish between the Nyaya philosophy, the Mimamsa philosophy, the Yoga philosophy, and the Uttara Mimamsa, that is Purva Mimamsa too. So there are these six darshanas which I mentioned earlier in the class, they're always being contemplated by this inner self, if you're a Hindu. If you're in India, if you're an ancient rishi, if you're even a more modern rishi, like Swami Vivekananda coming here. So the rest of the world can sit up and take notice of that, is that this great distinction, even if you leave it in two states, is already beginning to inform us of something deeper. It's beginning to define our antakarna for us, our inner organ, which if you are to look further later, you'll find out that one of the great truths is that Brahman, God, cannot be the cause for anything. So then it's causeless, it's actionless, it's divine. So then where is all of this outer Atman coming from? It's coming from the inner Atman. And there's a peace chant, we chant about that too. Om Purnamadaha, Purnamidam, Purnat Purnamadachyate. That's sometimes at the beginning of these Upanishads and at the end too. It means everything that's external is finite, changing, but it's infinite in its scope. Everything that's internal is also infinite. From the infinite internal, the infinite external has come. But being infinite, that is, they're both infinite, then in the end, when we evaluate it, I find out that only infinite remains. Everything is infinite. This will give us a clue and a way to open up an inner gate towards this superior Atman. There, two names are given to it, Paramatma and Shantatman in the scripture. That's a lot to say, and just 4 slokas, or three slokas. And so we can pause here for a second and think about that. So right now, there are 3 states to the Atman as described by Anguras, this ancient rishi. And 2 of them we've seen as Bahir and Antar. That is the outer, which is our body, our hands, all of the materials of the body that he's described completely for us here. And then there's this inner Atman that's nicely put here, indicated by what's outside. That is, if you see the 5 elements out there, you'll find out that your body is also made of those 5. That there's earth here, and there's water here, liquid, and there's fire here, energy, and there's air here, and there's space here. See, so all the 5 elements are here in the body, and so that would be a good starting point to find out where the origin of the 5 elements have come from that have been able to formulate this physical form, which gets into so much mischief, as Krishna said. See, remember, other references in the inner Atman are important, because it's obviously when they're talking about smeller, taster, toucher, hearer, leader, and agent, that there's something that's manning the senses and the elements. And the senses then and elements both must have subtler forms. In SRB, all of you have been following for some 35 years and know that those are called tanmatras, and then there's an energy called prana and psychic prana that guides the thoughts. And these are the kind of things that we're not grown with. That is, we didn't grow up with these kinds of teachings about the inner self or inner Atman. If we heard about the inner self, we maybe started to mistake it for thoughts, for intellect, and and for our ego. Oh, that's me in there. Hi, small self. And so we were making all sorts of errors by misinterpreting the inner self to be the great self. So you can see that probably short of that risk of misinterpreting the Atman being non-dual, there's a great benefit of taking that risk, is to see that this is going to delineate between the outer and inner. So if you did have the wherewithal from your youth, to realize that I think there's something inside of me that's different from all this, and I'm going to call that my inner voice, I'm going to call that my inner self, I'm going to call that my guiding angel, I'm going to call that all sorts of things. But if I had it explained to me that it was also changing, and that it was also using thought, and it was also tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, it was the agent of all those things, and it also danced, it also sang, it also shouted, it also stumbles, it says here. It stumbles around, so it gets into a tamasic state and makes a fool of itself. That's the body that's doing that? No, that's the mind that's causing the body to do that. So control of the mind then would cause the mind to be divine. It would cause the body to be divine. So it has these specific objects that it focuses on through listening, through smelling, through touching, through grasping, and it plays musical instruments and sings and dances. So we're talking about this inner organ divine that is constantly in a course of mutability. It's always changing from day to day, from hour to hour, and this is why they want you to meditate, so you can still that inner mind. I mean, if it were the self, you wouldn't need to practice meditation. But since you're mistaking the mind for the inner self, and you haven't distinguished it, you've distinguished it from the outer changing self, from nature and so forth, but you haven't distinguished it from the unchanging yet. So there's this medium point where you want to be meditating and withdrawing the mind from its sense objects. That's just yoga, right? That's why it says it should be distinguishing here between nyaya, between yoga, between mimamsa. That's what the inner organ's for, to help so that the body will not accrue karma and keep being reborn again in ignorance and suffering. So if it did that process of that it's supposed to do for you, then the dancing, the singing, the playing of musical instruments, the hearing, the touching, the tasting, the smelling, all of that would be divine life, you see, because you would know that it's based on something purer and deeper. What is that? That's the Paramatman, that's the Shantatman. And salutations to my good friend Swami Shantatmananda. I'm thinking of you when I must have taken your name when you saw this Upanishad. So Shantatman is that supreme self, also called Paramatman. Param, of course, means pure and supreme. And when you get into it, you would say, oh, there's just not that much to say about it compared to the outer Atman and the inner Atman. Wrongity, wrong. There's actually, Angarius would disagree with you. He's got much more to say about the true Atman than he does about the outer Atman and the inner Atman. So you can imagine then how divine it is, how wonderful it is. And even if it's changeless and it's immutable and it's all pervasive, and some of the things that's going to get described here by it, then it must be far more resplendent and far more purnamadaha, full of everything, and it's also, interestingly and specifically, importantly, free of suffering. You see, both the outer Atman, body, inner Atman, mind, are always engaging in suffering. See, and they can't get away from it, and they get very affected by it. They accrue karma by it. So that means that we have to go. Angarius wants to go one step deeper to the third stage of the Paramatman, And we can read that in the fourth sloka. So in the first sloka we had the introduction. Second sloka we had what was in the outer Atman. Third sloka we had what was the inner Atman consists of. Of course, all of these have to be in part, but it's a pretty good list when you look at it. Where else are you going to find a list like this? And then the fourth sloka of the first section, then he starts describing the bounties and the beauty of the Paramatma. And he says, next comes the Supreme Self, the imperishable. So right away we know body and brains are perishing. The mind also has a kind of death, and it usually will come back again in another body. But as far as this lifetime is concerned, it's perishable. So first he says it's imperishable, and it is to be meditated on with the help of yogic steps. So here's where Vedanta and yoga begin to make their fine hybrid. These steps are breath control. Upanishads always start out with that. Vedanta always starts out with that. It already assumes that you've got ahimsa, non-violence, truthfulness, non-covetousness, moderation of senses, wisdom, worship of the Lord. The yamas and niyamas of yoga already are in place, and it already probably figures out that you've found your one position to meditate in, and you're not shifting around a lot. And also then what's next when you have the yamas, niyamas, and the breath is this fourth limb. So this is what it says. This Supreme Self is to be meditated on with help of yogic steps. It starts with the fourth, as far as classical Yoga is concerned, breathing exercises. Next it says breath control. Then withdrawal of the sense organs. You know what that is if you've been studying with me for decades, as I said. That's pratyahara, the fifth limb of yoga. To be able to control the senses. What senses? These senses. And the sixth sense, you see. Hearing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling, and what is connected to, called the inner Atman, called the mind. Controlling those. That is, to be able to withdraw them from your objects. You can let them go back and associate with the object again, but you need to be able to withdraw them on demand. Then fixation of mind. Okay, that would be concentration, of course, dharana. So pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, right? If you're tracing the yogic steps he mentions here. After fixation of mind, contemplation and full concentration would be meditation samadhi, right? This Supreme Atman is to be inferred by the thinkers on the self as like unto the seed of a banyan tree, or a grain of millet, or 100th part of a split hair. Thus is he to be one and not known. That is, if you try and know with the restless mind and a body out of control, that's why nobody knows God and loves God, understands God, seeks God in this day and age, because he has to be approached and won by these yogic steps. It's your discipline that does that. He'll come to you. Sri Ramakrishna said that. The devotee gets control of God, throws that rope of my practice around him, and brings him to me, you see. If you try and seek him through a mind that's full of knowledge and ignorance, you're not going to find. So he's to be inferred by these great thinkers who think upon the self as like to the seed of a banyan tree. If you ever found one of those when you were here in Maui across the channel, you see, and unfortunately Lahaina had a pretty bad time of it not too long ago with a big fire there, but we used to go to that park in Lahaina, and one of the biggest banyan trees in the world was there. Our whole symphony, our whole musical 80-person symphony could set up under that, branches of that tree, and play for the people of Lahaina. So we never saw a seed there very often, but it was very tiny, you see, of this whole spreading network of branches and this huge trunk with all its interlacing trunks. You have to think about the essence of that tree, not just get overwhelmed by the tree itself or use it for shade or whatever. But there's a seed to it. That's seeking origins, you see. Or a grain of millet, that's pretty small. Or a 100th part of a split hair. So take a hair out of your head, you'd have a hard time splitting it twice, right? Even with a magnifying glass. But think about it split 100 ways. That's going to go beyond the physical hair. That's why some of the Upanishads talk about nadis that are hundreds and thousands of them inside of your subtle body, which is this body. That is, the antar has channels by the 100,000s. Your body has quite a few thousands too. Thus he is one, not known. He is not born, does not die, does not dry out, is not wetted nor burnt, does not tremble, is not split, does not sweat. All of this probably good in reference to what Sri Krishna told Arjuna on the battlefield, right? That self of the Atman is never pierced by arrows or spears. And it's never drowned by water. It's never burnt by fire. So these are ancient teachings of India that go in all directions to all the darshanas in the breadth of India, contained here in the foundation of India's teachings called Upanishad. That teacher you find which unloosens the knots of ignorance in you, Upanishad. So, yes, not born, doesn't die, it's not dried out, it's not wetted, not burnt, does not tremble, does not split, does not sweat. It is beyond the gunas. And every other religion in the world, the followers of the religion are going to go, hey, what's that, sir? What did you say? We've never heard of those. So we have to find about 3 gunas, tamas, rajas, sattva. That is inertia and activity and balance, if you want to put it scientifically. Or if you want to put it in terms of your restless antaratman, that is your restless mind, then it's going to be dullness, restlessness, and temporary balance. Rajas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. Your mind is going through that all the time. The point here is that the Atman doesn't go through that. So right away, if it's beyond those 3 things, we have to say it inactive with a capital I. See? Whereas these two cannot claim, these 2 forms of the Atman, states of the Atman, cannot claim that. The mind might be able to claim it in deep sleep. But in the body's tossing and turning in sleep, it's not necessarily having that kind of inactivity with a capital I. So it's beyond the 3 gunas. It is the eternal spectator. So here we have what we were talking about yesterday at satsang, the witness consciousness, or sakshi bhutam. Everything that happens, if you don't have the spectator within you, you're running towards it to grasp it. Like, doesn't matter whether it's beautiful or horrible, they run towards it to grasp it. They say, oh, that's horrible, but they're so attracted to the spectacle of the horror. So it doesn't matter really whether it's beautiful or horrible. People run towards it unless they have the ability to withdraw the senses and the mind. You know, going back to the other steps of yoga, right? So if you were able to see something beautiful and not fall into its influence, you're able to see something horrible and not react to it, then the spectator's alive in you. You see, the witness consciousness is alive in you. There's no other teaching like it in the other religions, along with the gunas. So gunas and spectator, right away, Angress is giving us this beautiful essence of the Vedanta and informing us of this. If we've already heard about it, he's reaffirming it for us. If we already know it, he's celebrating with us, you see, about it. So it's ever pure. So Haranmaya Pade Kochi Virajan Brahmanishchalam. It's this light that has no other darkness competing with it. Darkness cannot compete with it. It's partless. That's a good way of saying indivisible. In case that's too long a word for people or they don't want to think about it that way. It doesn't have any parts, like everything else, like your body. What are the parts? Backbone, nails, ankles, stomach, thighs, cheeks, ears, brows. Are those enough parts for you? Be happy with the parts. But now meditate on the partless reality, which is the which is the Paramatman. Because the Antaratman, the mind, has still got plenty of parts to it that can insinuate themselves. It's alone. The word there would be kevalam. It's supremely alone. It's not like it's lonely. If you knew the Atman, you would never be lonely. People get lonely when they come to Earth and take on a body-mind mechanism. Then all of a sudden, the possibility of loneliness comes up, right? Oh, I'm so lonely here. Where's my friend? But the Atma is your eternal companion. See? So that's going to come with you. Then what is a great soul like Vivekananda? Did he ever feel lonely? Did Jesus ever feel lonely? Did Buddha ever feel lonely? He was actually seeking aloneness because he knew that Buddha nature was like that. It was alone with a capital A. Kevala asti, I am alone. One of the great sayings of India. It is subtle. We already talked about that, Anaranian or Sukshma. So it's going to be subtler than the gross. It's going to be subtler than just the subtle. It's going to be the subtlemost of all. And that's why they say, since you cannot grasp that with this, and definitely not with that, what do? Think about a millet grain. Think about a seed of a banyan tree. Think about a split hair and meditate with that vision. Oh Lord, are you that subtle? Reveal yourself to me. I cannot know you, but I can win you if you come my direction. See, I'll attract you to me. It owns nothing. So I would say that one of the more detrimental qualities of both the Bahya Atman and the Antaratman is that it wants to own things. It's actually one of the 8 occult powers, is wanting to own things and dominate over beings and possess things for itself. I want this for myself. And usually it's not going to want to share that with other people. If it wants it for itself and it wants to share it, then there's a little bit of light there. You got some sattva going on, not just rajas and tamas. But basically, it's in the Buddhism, it's this selfish grasping. See, I think the animal for that is the rooster. See, I used to feed chickens. They were abandoned. The females couldn't give eggs anymore, so they just put them out in the field. So they came up, and there's this rooster who was also worthless at the end of his life. So they all come up the fence, and I used to buy these special seeds for them, mix them together, and feed them once a day. It was a great subtle bliss to feed these abandoned chickens and rooster. But the rooster was, driving the chickens away from all the seeds I threw there beyond the fence, peck them, tear out their feathers, jump on them, hurt them. Of course, they wouldn't be waylaid. As soon as he was gone fighting with another female chicken, they'd come and steal some seeds. But basically, that rooster wanted all the seeds, and there was more there than he could eat. But he was just greedy in the midst of having. Maybe that's a good expression. Greedy in the midst of having might be a good expression for America today. And and then we know what's wrong with our politics. We know what's wrong with our business. We know what's wrong with our medical community. We know what's wrong with everything. And we can try and correct it, like Angiras wants us to do here. Realize the true self, which is, what was that again? It's without possessions. It owns nothing. See, and it's completely happy. At this time, then, let's read the top quote. It's a good entrance for it. Top quote of this chart says, the great Rishi Angus taught, the eternal spirit manifests itself in three ways: the self, the inner self, and the supreme self. However, this Atman is non-dual, ever pure, and is the very form of Brahman. Brahman alone shines forth from it. Even in the midst of this changing world, with its positive, negative, and mixed conditions. And here's what I'm referring to, what I was just saying. Like the child that ignores hunger and bodily pain and plays with its toys, the ever-happy Atman delights in itself, free of I, me, and mine. So it owns nothing and it wants nothing. And a very good metaphor there. The child would probably get fed up with being hungry and suffering and run to its mother. That's a good metaphor too, an analogy. But nonetheless, you see, and I remember this about my brothers and sisters in my own childhood, is that if I was unhappy and I got a hold of something to play with outside with a ball or whatever the case may be when I was a boy, then I would forget about food completely and I wasn't hungry anymore. I'd be, oh, I'm so hungry, I should go in and eat. Oh, there's a ball, you know, and it's just like the next 3 hours were over as far as hunger is concerned. And it's the same with pain. Oh, I've got this toothache, but I don't want to go to the dentist. So, you know, I'll just play with this game board over here. I don't need to tell the young people of today about gaming. It's gone beyond into a whole different realm. So the point of that is that you get, the mind can take itself and put itself on something. In this case, the Atman is happy inside of itself, free of possessions. And so we'll have to kind of meditate on that, try and envision what that's like. So, okay, the Lord is subtler than a grain of millet, and you know, but what else is the Lord? You know, it's happy in the midst of owning and having nothing. Let me put that into my definition of what Brahman is, or God, or Almighty Spirit, or Almighty Father, or Buddha nature. Let me put that in and add to my store of knowledge about it. So that's what I'm referring to here in the description of this very long fourth sloka of segment 1 of the Atma Upanisad. To finish it up, because I'm commenting on it as I go, it's blemishless. So I suppose you could be ever pure and still have blemishes. if you want to contest that I've already said that. Basically, it could be a person who's just perfect, but they still have some blemishes on them. But inside, they're perfect. So the blemishes are incidental in that case. They're just something that happened to the non-essential part of it. But the essential part remains the same and ever pure. It's ever free, never bound. Immutable. That's, of course, changeless. I've already said enough about that. It's devoid of sound, touch, color, taste, and smell. And that's what the Antaratman is involved in. You can have tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling as the actual organs in the outer organ, but on the inside it turns into these tanmatras. Who is it? Who's the one that's smelling? Who's the one that's enjoying the taste? Who's the one that's hearing the music and enjoying it? Who's the one that's tasting the food and enjoying it? That's the mind's business going around. So that's why we have to ask, you know, who is the enjoyer here? Who's the supreme enjoyer? There was a God blog about that last week we talked about. You have to imagine the sum total of all beings and what they enjoy through the senses. And then you can take that and put that as a definition for God with form. That's called Ishvara. He's the sum total of all enjoyment. Oh, I wish I was him. Hold on there, he's also the sum total of all suffering. Can you manage that? You see, he's the sacrificer too. So he's the enjoyer, but he's also the sacrificer. You have to know that about God with form. But we're talking about here about God beyond form, and Angaras is helping us to see that there's a difference between body, mind, and spirit. The three states of the same Atman. So we're not falling for any divisions here, as I said earlier, but we're actually fleshing out all of the knowledge about who we truly are, what we have at our disposal, how bountiful we are, how precious is this precious human body even. So devoid of sound, touch, color, taste, and smell, the Atman has already said that. It's already happy playing with itself, you see, in its own alone state of fullness. Lonely fullness. It's already happy with that. It's non-grasping. So there again, you look at the rooster and so forth. I just said about that. It's not grasping and holding on to things. Our own founder, Lexixen, peace and blessed be upon him, was often talking about the problem of humanity in terms of selfish grasping. See, that's one of the go-to phrases he used for that unfortunate quality, negative quality in human beings. Also omnipresent. I like to call that the three ohms: omnipresent, omnipotent, and what's the other one? Omniscient, yes. So we have three ohms there, three great words that begin with om. In this case, omnipresent there would be all-pervasive. It's a beautiful phrase in English. There are some English words, we're fortunate to have the English language when we look into the original Sanskrit of India, and the Pali too, is that we have some words that can really define what the rishis realized and what they intended by these words. So omnipresence is one of those, also all-pervasive. That means both of these selves are pervaded by this. See. This self is pervaded by that self, and that self is then pervaded by this self. So both of these are provided by Atman. That's how we find out that Atman is within, everywhere, in everyone, in everything, at all times. And this is what Angaras is trying to tell us and communicate to us. Finally, in the end of this long fourth sloka on the Paramatman, it acts not, we said that, it is unthinkable and invisible. So that's painful to people who are trying to seek God. Where are you, O Lord? Where are you, Divine Mother? Where's my father and mother? I don't see them here, in objects, and I don't feel them here in emotions. I don't enjoy them here in my senses. I'm getting very limited experience out of my Bahya Atman alone, if I think I'm only that. So this leads me on to think that it's beyond vision, it's invisible. So I'm going to have to look at it again, like oil and sesame seeds, going to have to look for it within here, and then find out that knowledge is also going to fall short of it, but it will open a door to my true self. That's often called Jnana-Chakshu, third eye. It purifies the impure. So it's good enough, really beautiful to say that it's ever pure, without blemishes. We already described that. But not only that, is that if it gets into an admixture, if it comes in contact with what's impure, it'll purify that. Any more votes for the supremacy of the Paramatman here? When you hear that, and I think I like that. Oh, you're pure, good for you. What good's that to me? Well, I'll make you pure too. Okay, I'll accept you, you see. So these are all great words to hear from the lips of an illumined soul like Angaras. Also another shocker here, it's unhallowed. Unhallowed. So people don't talk about Atman. Did you ever hear it from your parents here in the West growing up? Many didn't even hear it in India growing up in this day and age. They heard about some god or goddess or some ancestor in other parts of the world, but whoever told you about your beautiful divine self with all of these transcendental qualities in it and said, you're that. You're not a lamb, you're a lion. So wake up and realize your true nature, and then in consideration of how full the Atman is, pass it on to others. That's how the pure can purify the impure, by that willingness to pass it on. But the whole thing then is that it's unhallowed. Then I'm going to have to find someone like Angaras, like we found Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj in our lives. Peace and bliss be unto him. We found him, and he was talking about nothing but Atman and Brahman all day. So, not a bad trade-off. If the whole world around you, your family, your teachers in school, the society around you that you were mixing with, none of them told you about the Atman, you finally found one person who could talk about nothing else but the Atman. So, then that person must be like a seed of a banyan tree. It must be like a millet of grain in a pile of grain. Must be like oil somewhere in a sesame seed that I'm going to have to find. And so the game's afoot, and the great goal is to be reached that way. Ankaras, you'll have to go to beings like Gaudapad and others to find the non-dual described so mellifluously and so completely expanded upon like this, and so you can take each one of his words and take it apart like I'm doing, contemplate it. So in this fourth sloka he does that about the Paramatman, and he ends like this: it acts not, and it is not subject to empirical existence. So here he draws the line. He says, don't conclude just because that this pervades these two bodies, that these two bodies are this. You see, these two bodies are living in empirical existence. There's a beautiful line later where he puts it in a different way. Yeah, here it is. What sets empirical life afoot is the appearance of the world as being real. What winds up empirical life is its appearance as being unreal. See, that's the kind of thing you look for, deep kernels in this after the explication has been given. So what sets this life forward is we think that everything that we've projected and are experiencing is the reality. But it's only this part of the reality if we want to be kind to it. What winds up our preoccupation with the empirical existence is our final realization that this is not real. This is illusory. And I can prove it. It changes. It suffers. There's a couple of very good reasons why I can convince you of this, like Angaras is doing for us. And now I'm going to have to convince you of it, and you're going to have to practice these steps of yoga. Get on top of your vital energy by breathing. Withdraw your mind, at least for a time, from these objects so you can find yourself again, because it's not attached and it's lonely. It's a loneliness, divine loneliness. And it's also able to concentrate and meditate, and it has a samadhi to it, full concentration, full focus in it. It's nothing but full focus, the Atman. So that's why a good way of finishing it up, it's not subject to empirical existence. He concludes the whole first section with those words. So you can see that he's on the guard with his students and devotees and followers, and anyone who will hear this thousands of years later than it was written, like we're sitting here doing right now, and to make sure that we don't mistake these two for this. At the same time, give us the permission to go ahead and see that this shoots through all of this, as Sri Ramakrishna said, like sweetness through sugarcane juice. There's bits of husk, there's bits of grain in sugarcane juice when you filter it. In India, when you run the sugarcane through those presses, but there's also the juice itself and the sweetness. So there's three things there in that. So like that, it says this will run through all of this. It will run through hearing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling. It will run through shouting, enjoying, dancing, singing, playing musical instruments. It'll be there in earth, air, fire, water, and ether for you. You'll feel its presence in all of that. But you just saw and heard how subtle it is. So beware and be wary of not accepting anything but the essence and the ultimate Atman itself, the Paramatman itself. Let's finish the chart. And it repeats this. What sets empirical existence afoot is the appearance of it being real. What winds up and ends empirical life is exposure to the fact of its being unreal. To the yogi, bondage and liberation both are set up by Maya. Having won the status of Brahman, the yogi is no more born from his ignorance. All bodies have gotten consumed by the fire of its direct experience of being as the self, Atman. So I am pure being. I am the self in all. I am Atma Brahma. The self is Brahman. Only the I exists, none else exists, and thou art that, as Vivekananda said in one of his beautiful poems. All right, so we've taken 4 slokas, and this whole chart is section 1 of the Atma Upanishad, discussing its three systems. So now, to give it more credence, let's go to our next chart, because we can always come back and look at this next week on our second installment. In our second installment, we have 31 slokas in section 2 to look through. So if we don't get through them, of course, we have the ability to take a third class on a third Sunday if we like. Now, this will help clarify some. It's a chart I made some last year, months ago, called Gradated Compounds of Consciousness. This is also taking this, I wouldn't call it compromised, but I'd call it explanatory way of taking that which is indescribable and trying to describe it, or taking that which is indivisible and talking about its sections, at least how they appear, like talking about yourself as 3 different levels, or talking about your consciousness as having 3 states, right? What are they? Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Does that take away the beauty of your consciousness by the fact that it has 3 states? Does it make it less non-dual? Only if you fall for the states and self and not for consciousness. So you always have to keep that indivisible reality in mind and in view as the ultimate. What did I just chant? Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmayava Jivaham Sakalam Jagat Kya. Still final and most mature conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. But living in constant recognition of that fact is called enlightenment. So you could say all is Brahman, walk away from it, and not call it Brahman anymore, and call it life, like terrestrial existence, or like he says here, empirical existence. Shankara also uses that term. Then all of a sudden it's not Brahman anymore. See, but it always was Brahman, always will be Brahman, never was not Brahman. So you have to have that mindset all the time. That's called pure conscious awareness. And and called the highest form of mindfulness, if you want to put it that way in today's terms. So when we talk about this in terms of compounds, what Swami Vivekananda said, everything is this highest form, or highest form of consciousness. It says, in this first quote, for instance, the question of what came first, the chicken or the egg, is not rational. For consciousness, as well as being immediate and spontaneous, is anterior to form and activity. The chicken comes, the chicken goes, but it comes and goes on consciousness. Consciousness was first in order to allow the form of the chicken to be born, and then to allow that form to take on a body and leave a body. Something had to be the underlying. I mean, this is obvious to most people, but they don't think about it that deeply. Let's look at the chicken and say, give me the egg, you see, and then eat the egg in many different ways. But the question of which came first is irrational, because consciousness is always first. This is what it says here. It is the grand predecessor of everything. In the case of embodying beings and nature, then, the awareness that infused celestial, human, and animal forms precedes all of nature's manifestations. But it cannot embody until nature produces the many worlds and their copious bounty. Thus it appears that nature is on the scene prior to all creatures, high and low, but the great mind's will pre-plans all that is to occur and provides the multi-layered, multifaceted ground upon which it occurs as well. And intelligence is the first thing out of the gate. That's a quote from Vivekananda. And the first compound of consciousness. That's also a quote from Vivekananda. So this is how I would put it together in terms of the king of consciousness, or the grand predecessor of everything, is pure conscious awareness itself, nameless, formless, deathless. Go back, find your Atma Upanisad, review this class and what I just went through, and take Sloka 4 and look at this chart and make sure that you know what your Paramatman is, what Brahman is. And then these kinds of realizations will come to you, and you'll be able to fully understand them. Now, Purusha Prakriti, Brahman Shakti, Brahman and its Maya, there are different couplings going on here. God and the soul, different religions and different seers and different thinkers throughout the world have always seen these two partitions of, God and the world, for instance. Vedanta always would want to say, God is real, Brahma is real, the world is changing. But dualistic religions might aver different. They'd say, well, God is different than the world and human beings, and the two can never meet. So that idea of oneness is not present in that kind of thinking, in dualism. And it's beginning to become clear in qualified non-dualism, as taught by beings like Lord Vashishta and others. And Angiras is definitely posing that we should look beyond a sort of sterile and limited idea of, the self is one. Well, yeah, but it also has these, obviously has these three different platforms it operates on, like our consciousness. It wakes, it dreams, it goes into deep sleep. What's that all about, you see? So when we're talking in terms of twos, then this is how I put it in this chart. There's these two eggs, as it were. On the left-hand side there, you see basically the sentient soul and how it emerges. On the right-hand side, you see how nature has a primordial seed to it. And if you look back at this chart, eventually you're going to see how this makes sense out of the expression of this. So obviously Angiras is talking about the self expressing itself in three different ways, even though it's always one. Like that actor who puts on clothes and goes to the theater, takes them off, gives up his role, goes back home, and he's just the father again. That's one person that's doing that. So it's one Atman that's taking on these three forms. And it's one Atman that's giving rise to these two different eggs, as it were. Let's call them Brahmandas, or let's call them Hiranyagarbha. If you can see, and it's not a hard study, on the right-hand side there, nature's primordial seeds starts in unmanifested Prakriti. So unmanifested Prakriti then is latent and potential in consciousness. And there's where you're going to get later air, earth, fire, water, ether, physical universe full of billions and billions of suns and planets. All of that's going to come flowing out of unmanifested Prakriti. It has to have a source. So everything here, like that seed in the banyan tree we're talking about, metaphorically for Brahman, here it actually becomes more real to say that everything comes out of a seed in nature. And those seeds are then all stored in manifested Prakriti. What the great seers found and later communicated to us is that those seeds are in our deep sleep state, in an unformulated or formless part of our consciousness. They lie there. And when beings come into the rest of this arc called life, when nature comes into it and when souls come into it, as Anguirus was saying here, it's basically it's entering into all of these. This is getting created from these seeds, and it appears first before as kind of as if intelligence and sentient weren't there to see it appear, and then beings see it later and they come into it somehow and take on a body there in the worlds, and that might take billions and billions of years in the creation theory and so forth. But what India is saying is that no, that's all an appearance, and it's all lying in potential inside of the great mind, and the great mind too wakes, dreams, and sleeps. And when it sleeps, it's called pralaya, and everything goes into formlessness. Everything that is insentient goes back to unmanifested Prakriti. The soul, which is always sentient, goes back to the Atman. And this is how, in general at least, they would explain the two modes that are always going on. God and the world, if you want to call it that, or Purusha and Prakriti, is a very good coupling. So we have to then fill in our thinking about nature. Oh, it has a source, and it's not in Brahman. Brahman is not the source for anything. It's not the cause for anything. It's the unsourced source for everything. But basically, everything that is insentient has seeds back in unmanifested Prakriti. What are some of those things? These three gunas that Anguirus just mentioned, right? That is inertia, activity, stasis. Those three are all there in unmanifested Prakriti as seeds. That's why beings want to get beyond them and realize themselves as their Paramatman. So they want to realize their supreme self, because these are binding and can route them into lifetimes and suffering and so forth. What's next after gunas? The tattvas. We know 24 of them in Samkhya that Lord Kapila outlined for us. Come to the December retreat next month now and find out that one Upanishad we studied recently lists 92 different tattvas. So you can see that tattvas, or insentient principles, are very interesting as stepping stones which the soul takes back in. Like, for instance, air, earth, water, fire, and ether, tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, smelling, inside of your two lesser selves. Those are tattvas. Consciousness visits them and abandons them, visits them and abandons them. Or if you're not careful, it'll visit them and become them. That's a spiritual suicide. Then you're born thinking, I'm an object, I'm a body, I'm an animal, which never was the case. So that's why these kinds of delineations that Angaris is making also can be explained in the ancient, what's called the Adi Daiva Vidya, the ancient divine wisdom of India, comes forth to help explain this. So these tattvas, like air, earth, fire, water, and ether, they have their seeds back in unmanifested Prakriti. Then you call the Pancha Mahabhutas, remember I mentioned that earlier? 5 Maha, great, Bhutas, elements. Air, earth, fire, water, and ether come out of unmanifested Prakriti. That's where their actual origin is. They didn't just somehow physical space appeared, and then billions of years later, one planet actually got 5 of them, you see, out of nowhere, and nobody can explain it except through a Big Bang, which is energy. So basically, we're looking at something that has a definite seen and perceived source to it in seeds that are locked back inside of this cosmic mind, which we were talking about up here. They're not consciousness itself, but they're compounds of consciousness. And intelligence is the first one. We'll get to that. Then living forms come out of that. So that's this, you see. And probably somewhat of that too. It's not the soul. The soul's over here in the sentient arc. The living forms are bodies, gross body and subtle body. Those consciousness takes on and abandons. They're not all alone by themselves, full by themselves. They do die, they do dry out, they do sweat, they do all these things that Angaris is telling us about that the Paramatman is not subject to. They're part of empirical existence, they're part of manifestation, and they all have their seeds back in insentient nature, unmanifested Prakriti. Well, if it's insentient, then how does it express itself? Through the sentient side of everything. Let's follow the arc this way and go around to the sentient soul and how it emerges. Remember, he's talking about how empirical life starts afoot, and then because someone has to all of a sudden say, oh, look at all that manifestation there, I think I can get into that and enjoy it. But how does empirical life end? Oh, I got into it and I enjoyed it and it didn't satisfy, I think I want out of it, you see. So that's how empirical life, to quote him here, will wind down when the soul gets tired of these mechanisms, knowing them to be insentiency, gets tired of these two expressions of the self, which are limited, and finds itself in the eternal self. Empirical life stops there. That's called the end of transmigration. It's also called living liberated condition, jivan mukta. And it's determined and characterized by the word samadhi, or the highest state of pure conscious awareness. If you were to follow it around this way in the following minutes, you'd see psychic prana comes about. That would be kicking in here at a rather high level of yogic step, right? In other words, psychic prana is found here in the antaratman, the inner atman. That's what's guiding your thoughts. It's what's actually not so much guiding them, but animating them. My thoughts are moving. Oh, my thoughts seem to be kind of stopped right now. My thoughts are low. Oh, my thoughts are really inspired. That prana flowing or not causes this to happen. And psychic prana begins to take on the look of intelligence coming from the Atman. That's why I put it in this side, in this egg, you see. It's almost synonymous with Shakti at this point, the dynamic power of God. And that's why it's connected next to knowledge. I'd have even been better to put wisdom there, but we're coming up on intelligence, so we want to make a distinction between intellect of the knower and the intelligence of the Atman, or of Divine Mother. So knowledge, you'll find that in the cosmic mind, but the cosmic mind is guided by a supreme will called Shakti. That supreme will is intelligence itself with a capital I. That's why we make a distinction between intelligence and intellect. Intellect is back here in the Antakarana. It's a storage unit. It's part of this. See, it's a living form. But intelligence that gets into the intellect, that has a chance of actually rising up and out of it. So that's this first compound of consciousness, Vivekananda is saying. And it's designated best by the word Om. The three mantras of AUM, which has all sorts of significance in the sentient way that it's looked at by the rishis like Angaras and others. And then there's what we're talking about all day today, the Atman, the divine Atman. So this means that everywhere we look and everything we see, all that we think, and I think we can pick it up here in our next Sunday's class and go on to explaining the section 2 of the Atma Upanishad. But just to conclude that then, since we have considered and looked at the 4 slokas of section 1, which were powerful and full, took a whole chart to introduce them to us, and some explanation of some of the basically principles there, then we can pretty much end on a positive note with our gratitude to the great Rishi Angaras, that he has fleshed this out for us and opened us up maybe from a more limited sense of oneness to an all-pervasive sense of oneness, to an expansive sense of oneness. It's good to say I'm religious. Might be better to say I like all religions, but it's best of all to say all these religions are universal in existence. And so in that way we want to expand from that limited sense of self to an internal sense of self, to a grand and great predecessor that's at the foundation of everything. And that's often sung about, and we will end that way too here. Jai so tu hai tujhse humne dil ko lagaya, jo kuch hai so tu hai tujhse humne dil ko lagaya. O Lord, I have finally understood that all exists in Thee. Every heart is ultimately tied and united to Thee. Yeah, all that exists art Thou. Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Yanamurtim Nandvaititam Gaganasadrisham Tatmama Shadilaksham Ekam Nicham Bimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tanamami. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.